Joining us now, member of the House Judiciary Committee, Democratic Assistant Whip, Congresswoman Veronica Escobar of Texas. Where would you like to begin when it comes to reacting to the president's comments yesterday, from the invasion to the joke?
Well, good morning, Mika. I'll tell you, that clip, when I saw it last night, it made me very, very sad for our country, that we are at such a moral rock bottom, and that we have a president who's created an addiction to hate, an addiction to bigotry, and he uses every opportunity he can to feed and grow that addiction. We are in so many crises. We are juggling, as Americans, so many different crises. This moral crisis is very painful to watch unfold.
Yep.
Congresswoman, it's Willie Geist. It's good to see you.
Hi,
as always. You sit on the Judiciary Committee, and you supported the resolution to hold Attorney General Barr in contempt yesterday. What specifically did you hear or not hear from him that led you to that position?
The Attorney General gave us absolutely no choice, and we have tried, our Chairman Nadler has tried for over 2 months to get access to materials and information that rightfully belongs in the hands of the Congress. We are the people's house. We are here to do the people's work. We are working on behalf of the American people. They have stalled, stonewalled, obstructed. The committee has done everything possible to accommodate Mr. Barr, to make sure that we bend over backwards to ensure that accommodations are made, by essentially refusing to provide the report, by not showing up to a hearing, and ultimately by sending a letter about executive privilege before we even walked into the hearing room. He gave us no other choice. You know, yesterday during the hearing, Willie, I mentioned I wanted to remind the American public why these hearings, or why this hearing in particular, is so important. The United States was attacked by Russia. And the president and his family and his team knew about it, welcomed it, never reported it, and then the president tried to obstruct an investigation about that attack. The Russians are still at it today. They were very successful in their attack against the United States, and all of us, Republicans and Democrats alike, should be working to get to the full truth so that we can prevent an attack on us again and protect this country.
Congresswoman, as you heard from your Republican colleagues in that hearing yesterday, and we heard as it was broadcast on television, they said, look, you got a special counsel. He had 2 years, had all the resources, time, and money he needed. He issued a 450-page report with 2 volumes that concluded that there was no conspiracy between the Trump and the Russian government. Time to move on. How do you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, my interpretation is they don't care about an attack by a foreign adversary on this country. It's not a very patriotic perspective, if you ask me. The Mueller report that we have seen, the redacted version, paints a very damning and frightening picture. I wonder if they've read it. If they had read it, they should be as alarmed and frightened as the rest of us are for our democracy.
Congresswoman, it's Jonathan Lemire. You marked this week that it's been about a year since the Trump administration began its policy of separating children from their families at the border. We know that the White House is moving towards having even stricter regulations for the asylum seekers, trying to really make it harder for those to come into the border, saying that their situations at home were dangerous and they're seeking asylum here in the United States. You're introducing legislation, right, to try to protect those asylum seekers. Can you walk us through what you're trying to do?
Right. I'm essentially trying to defund the migrant protection protocols policy that was put in place by this administration. When asylum seekers are legally seeking asylum in our country, what has been happening in El Paso is they've been sent back to Mexico to await their hearing and to await the due process. We're seeing that many of them are not returning because they can't. They don't have access to legal counsel. They're not getting their notices for their hearing. Okay. They are growing more and more desperate, and they're being put in danger, so we're trying to defund that program altogether.
Congresswoman, I think we do have to acknowledge that there is a real issue of how many people are showing up at the border right now. I think our numbers for the last month is the highest since 2007. We've topped 100,000 people a month for several months. The system is being overwhelmed. I think all of us can agree on that. What I don't understand is why there hasn't been more urgency about surging resources for the judicial process. Because if the judicial process occurs quickly, then asylum is determined, and if it's valid, they stay in this country. If it's not, they have to go back. Why aren't more people on a bipartisan basis trying to put resources? When I was there, they hadn't even funded the judicial positions that were in the budget. They hadn't even hired the people. Speak to that, because we've got a problem there, one the wall won't fix, because the wall's not going to stop people from asking for asylum. But we clearly, I mean, when I was there, they were still using paper in these courts. They hadn't even converted to electronic files, so you had to wait for a file to come from El Paso if you were in California. Talk about that, if you would.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. The same problems that you've outlined persist. And there has been in my view, a real misuse and misappropriation of funds. There's been an approach that has been far less than strategic. And I'll give you an example just on the DHS side, because there's the Department of Homeland Security side, there's the judicial side, and all of it has been ill-equipped, or I don't want to say ill-equipped, actually, has been unwilling or unable to be flexible enough to deal with the changing and challenge of how migration patterns have evolved. And we've known about the change in migration patterns for over 4 years now, and DHS has not changed its MO in 20 years. So I agree, total incompetence. And so you still have, for example, agents with a gun and a badge performing functions that could be performed by civilians. Those functions should be civilianized, even in the interim. DHS should be bringing civilian CBP folks, civilian Border Patrol folks to perform the functions that don't require law enforcement. Get law enforcement back on the line, get CBP back on the bridges so that we can see our economy continue to move. Because I'll tell you, their decision to move Customs Border Protection agents from our ports has created a semi-shutdown at our borders, at our ports of entry, on the economic side, on the trade side. So that's one example of just where you're thinking, oh my gosh, is there any common sense here? Why wasn't there any planning or strategy for this? We've been seeing it unfold for months and months. Folks like me have been warning from home, hey, you all, we're going to see more significant numbers in the spring once the weather warms up. What are you going to do? How are you going to plan for that? And it's an agency, DHS, that has been receiving hundreds of millions of dollars. The growth of funding in that agency, billions, is enormous. Then you take a look at the judicial side. You have a Department of Justice that still has an iron grip on its judges, and a president that has stalled funding for new judges and for the ancillary personnel that they need. It's hard not to be cynical about this and think that no matter how many resources we appropriate, we have an administration that wants to exacerbate a challenge so that there is a monumental crisis, so that he can then laugh when people say shoot him.
And that's just it. The goals are different. That really was a very excellent way of laying out the many dimensions of this problem. Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you soon. Coming